The LA Kings are an interesting team. They always seem to find guys who can play a role in their lineup all the time, and I think that's a testament to the abilities of Mark Yannetti. He's been there forever, and he's a person that every time he opens his mouth or I read quotes from him or read about him or hear about him, it's all very, very positive, and I have a lot of respect for what he brings. I may not agree with every decision the LA Kings make, but all in all, over long periods of time, he's a guy with a really good track record of finding good depth for a pretty decent team. So we'll see if that continues with this year's NHL Draft class. And they started things off with Henry Devitz at 31. Now, Devitz I had ranked a little bit lower. He was more of a late second round pick to me, but I do see reasons why a team might take a swing on him in the first round. He's got some really good offensive tools. He's creative. He's got some good vision with his passing work in the offensive zone. He can work off the half wall pretty well. He can walk the blue line with his skating ability pretty well. He drove some really good offensive zone metrics for me in a lot of the games that I saw and in the games that I tracked. But for me, when I look at a defenseman, I always think about defensive play outwards. And if the offensive play can really mop up for the defensive issues, then I may set it aside, and I'm not sure Devitz met that sort of benchmark for me. Devitz is a player that I felt had a bit of issues tracking guys along the boards and finishing checks and applying pressure along the boards. His stick checking work was a little bit mixed. On the rush, the footwork could be a little exposed with a little bit of lateral motion from puck carriers. I just felt like Devitz was a player where the defensive issues weren't really worth the risk on the upside in terms of offensive play, but the offensive upside is there, and there's nothing that says that he can't work on the defensive side of the play, and that can't improve to a point where maybe they find themselves a nice little depth offensive defenseman here. Look, a guy like Jordan Spence, I'm sure similar things would have been said. Was Jordan Spence a first-round pick? No. But looking back in the draft, maybe you could make an argument that he probably should have been. Maybe that's just them getting ahead of the same situation but drafting Devitz pretty early. We'll see what happens, but this is a pick that I thought was fine. I would have gone a different direction, but I could see the logic behind why you would go with a guy like this. At 59th, they drafted Voytek Chihos, and I think the logic behind this is Chihos is probably a third-line center or something in the NHL, and there's a lot of players in the first round that I look at and I go, these guys I feel pretty confident will be third-line centers in the NHL, so why draft that at 12 when you could get it at 59? For me, Chihos is an interesting player. He's still pretty physically raw, but he does get around the ice pretty well. He's a player that brings a lot of good off-puck smarts, there's a bit of power in his game, but I'm just not sure if it's going to be enough for an NHL job one day, but he has the profile that would fit a depth role for an NHL team. I wouldn't expect huge things out of him, but I absolutely would not be surprised if the LA Kings just called him up and he's stuck in the lineup for an extended period. They tend to do that, call up their young players that they've drafted and developed and put them in a job, and I'm thinking guys like Alex Laferriere, Andre Lee, Samuel Helene, and plenty of other guys, and they just see if they can stick. I have a lot of respect for that, and I could see Chihos being another one in a few years. At 88th, they drafted Christian Epperson, a player I had in my second round. Honestly, I had him higher than Henry Devitz, but only very slightly. Epperson, I feel like, did play second fiddle to Michael Misa for a lot of this season, but they played those two players together often for a reason. And Epperson is a player who I think brings really shifty skill, really good energy, especially with the puck on his stick. He's a player that I think got around the ice really well and just played off of a possession-focused playmaker like a Michael Misa really, really well. I still do wonder about the actual pace of play of his game really translating to the next level when you really look at it in detail, but I think for a re-entry player, he was one of the better options this year. He's a little further along in his development, and he did have a monster season this year, so I liked what I saw out of him. I saw him live a few times this year. He showed really, really well. In my opinion, wasn't just a passenger for Michael Misa, but having Michael Misa on your line a lot really helps you out, no matter who you are. At 120th, they drafted Kaden Harrington, another re-entry. I went and looked at him before the draft because I heard a little bit about him. I didn't really note a whole lot about him that was both positive or really negative. He's kind of fine. He's got some shooting ability as well. A bit of a blank slate defenseman, perhaps. You'll leave him in college for a while. He's a little more physically developed from here. There were other players I would have looked at, but I mean, looking at the rest of their draft class, which we'll see in a second, it doesn't really end up mattering at the end of the day. Because just a few picks later, they take Jimmy Lombardi, and Lombardi was a player on my watch list pretty much all season long. This is a guy who I think is a really, really intriguing blank slate of a hockey player because he's just wired so intelligently. He reads play really well. He gets up and down the ice really well as well. I think his offensive tools, similar to a guy like an Ate Yoki in the previous video we just did, are only beginning to be explored. I think with a better set of line mates or maybe a better team around him, I think there could be some real big upside for a guy like Lombardi because he just plays that reliable center's role so well. well. There's just a lot in his game that I really enjoyed, but I feel like he didn't push his envelope enough. He didn't attack guys one-on-one enough with the puck. But the shot, passing ability, the positioning off the puck especially was a strong point. His defensive reads, all of these things were, I thought, really strong and really high-end in this year's draft class. So if he can sort of build from here, become something a little more interesting, and really diversify his offensive game and produce a little bit more, this could be a really intriguing pickup at 125th, and I would have probably been okay with this pick if I was overruled over the guys that I liked in order to take this guy. Good player, really smart, and I think you can build on that. At 152nd, they again drafted a re-entry in Petteri Rimpen. Rimpen is a guy we saw at the World Juniors this year, stopping puck after puck after puck after puck, and he looked pretty good doing it. He's a player that was supposed to be drafted last year, and maybe to some was a surprise to not be. He got picked this year. Time will tell. I thought he was pretty good in the games in Liga that I saw this year. He was obviously very good at the World Juniors this year, stopped a whole lot of pucks for his team, and carried them pretty far in the tournament, so we'll see what happens. At 152nd, if you want a goalie, he was a pretty good option. At 184th, they drafted John Hovan, and this is more where I thought the valuation on Hovan should have been. I saw people with him in their top 50, some in the first round for a long time this year. I just didn't see it. He is big, he does have some good power on his frame, but again, I feel like with guys like this, the speed and the skill and the pace of play and the real ability to be a reliable puck possession player, it's a little bit of a work in progress for me with Hovan, and he did struggle to produce at the Finnish junior level this year, which is not the best junior league in the world. I feel like Hovan is a guy that long-term bet, maybe you get a depth player out of this and it could just be another depth LA King pick that they just call up and see if it works. He does have the frame that coaches are looking for. He is a relatively physical player. For me, it's just a matter of being an offensive needle mover that's projectable to the NHL, and right now I just don't really see that. But as a late round swing, sure, I see more logic behind that relative to where a lot of people had him this year, so I get it. At 196th, they drafted another re-entry, and one that I think is really intriguing in Brendan McMorrow. McMorrow last year with the NTDP was a guy where I constantly was watching him and going, that was pretty fun, that was pretty good, that was pretty fun, but then when I would watch full games and track some data on him, it was very meh. A consistent effort, shift in, shift out from McMorrow just was not really there. Similar things could have been said about Epperson at the same age, but going to the USHL this year, playing for the Waterloo Blackhawks, I thought McMorrow played really well. Really good pace in his game, really good speed getting up the ice, really resilient under pressure as well, which I felt was a big improvement from last year with the NTDP. It's an intriguing upside bet here with McMorrow. I don't think he's got really high upside, but as a bottom six winger maybe, with a bit of energy and a bit of forechecking ability, I could see it with McMorrow. He wasn't on my list, but he was always a player I enjoyed catching this season in the USHL, and he was another one of these guys where if someone brought his name up in preparations for the draft, I probably wouldn't say no. So we'll see what happens with McMorrow, but I thought he was a player that was very interesting for this year's draft class and a pretty good swing to take this late. At 216th, they drafted Will Sharp. Now, for me personally, Will Sharp should have been gone long before 216th. He was a player that was on my watch list for a long time this year. I think he was around a third round pick for me earlier in the year. This is a guy who I think flashes really good talent. He's a player with some skill, long distance passing ability, but for me, the more I saw him, the more I just didn't really feel like he projected as much beyond the junior level as an offensive defenseman. The tools are there to produce at this level. That is not in doubt at all. It's just a matter of that defensive consistency, that gap management off the puck, driving guys into the boards, guiding pressure around the defensive zone a little bit, just constantly being a defensively involved player was a little bit of a mixed bag for Sharp, and he didn't bring the offensive tools that really gave me the confidence to keep him on the list like a guy like Henry Bruce Devitz did in terms of his offensive play. But that being said, there is talent here. Maybe there's a nice long-term bet with Sharp. I know he's a player that some people thought was much better than this, but there are some other reasons why teams might have been a little bit lower on him. So for me, the Kings don't seem to mind factors like that they kind of bet on late, especially this late in the draft. And in terms of pure talent, I think he outperforms the average 7th round pick, and from there, who knows what's possible. So for me, the LA Kings are getting a 2B. The 2B is basically basically for a lot of solid and interesting players that they drafted without really, I think, drafting a super high upside option pretty much anywhere except maybe offensively with Henry Devitz. I think Devitz has a bit of a ways to go to get to being a first round caliber NHL defenseman draft pick, but the way he is wired and some of the things he did do when I saw him definitely put him in that category in a few different areas. Outside of that though, I could see Chihos, Lombardi, Rimpen, maybe Hovan, and McMorrow, all being guys that once they hit the AHL might find their way up into an NHL lineup one day thanks to their size, their work rate, the simplicity but the effectiveness in their game, the forechecking ability, some combination of all of those things. It just might land them in the NHL one day, and I am very much in favor of that type of strategy for the LA Kings. You draft a lot of players, you let them develop, you give them a good look in the NHL, you see what they're capable of, rather than signing a whole bunch of depth, you use your depth to use your drafted players, which is basically the whole point of the draft, unless you just want to draft guys to trade them. So for the LA Kings, it's another really strong draft class, I think. There's nothing super incredible here, but I think they drafted a few players that could develop well, and at the end of the day, I liked what they did. Sure, I would have gone a different direction with Henry Devitz, but at that point in the draft, yeah, you're probably splitting hairs a little bit with the guys that were still available, so it's an interesting pickup, and we'll see what happens with the LA Kings in the next few years. And with that, we're going to call it. If you liked the video, definitely like and subscribe. If you really liked it, definitely consider a subscription over at Scouching.ca, where you can get access to all kinds of fun data tools and our Discord server, and plenty of other fun stuff that you're just not going to find anywhere else on the internet. So check that out at Scouching.ca. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.